E11. I had no idea what that meant until I asked Lou and Lorn, and they told me that it was a craps reference. And it is also a reference to the film that we are going to be covering tonight. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The Genre Guys. So glad that you're here and so glad to hang out with you. You know, I'd like to think that we're some pretty cool customers. You know, Lou and Lorn and myself. We're not that shabby, but we can't hold a candle, unfortunately, to the original Rat Pack. Them being Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, Angie. Oh, no, Angie Dickinson wasn't part of the Rat Pack. Anyway.
But she was cool.
She was cool. And today
is cool.
Yes, is. Well, we're talking about Ocean's 11. And no, not the Clooney one, not the Brad Pitt one, not the A Little Less Conversation one, the original one, the original Ocean's 11. The movie which inspired the Clooney one, which I think, Lou, if I may quote you, the people were effortlessly cool.
No, that's not what I said.
That's not what you said.
I said that Clooney and company were acting cool, but Frank and Dean and Sammy were cool. And that was the difference in my mind.
There we go. So, I mean, obviously, I'm sure if you're watching this, you've already watched the Clooney movie, because I think everyone and their grandparents has seen the Clooney movie. And there are similarities, of course, between both films, because the Clooney film was inspired by this one. However, there are still some marked differences. And I'm going to toss it to Lou to give us a quick rundown of the situation. So take it away, Daddy-O.
Well, ring-a-ding-ding. Ain't that a kick in the head? The interesting story of the origin of this movie, which I discovered, is this. A minor director named Gilbert Kay was told the story by a gas station attendant who had come up with it, which is the whole thing of everybody in LA trying to peddle a script to somebody.
Wow.
And he told Peter Lawford, who bought the rights to the story from the director and the gas station attendant in 1958 and was imagining William Holden in the lead. Later on, when he told Sinatra joked, "Forget the movie, let's pull the job."
Nice.
And what it is a caper movie set in Las Vegas. And the idea is that Danny Ocean, hence the Ocean in Ocean's 11, played by Frank Sinatra, and his buddies from the 82nd Airborne in World War II are going to rob the casinos of Las Vegas on New Year's Eve. The Sahara, the Riviera, the Desert Inn, the Sands, and the Flamingo.
Back in 1960, when there were far fewer casinos.
Well, there were others, but those were the big ones, and those were the ones willing to take part in the movie, of course. But the other thing everybody knew, of course, about Las Vegas was Hoover Dam, and that's where all the electricity comes from to run Las Vegas and all the lights. So since they were a military group, they get this idea that if they do some finagling and they blow up the power tower that runs the power to Vegas from the dam, they can black out the casinos, and ahead of time, they have their electrician expert rewire the casinos so that when they turn on their emergency generators, it unlocks the doors to the cash cages and turns off the alarms. And they're going to go in and get it all in the dark, and they paint glow-in-the-dark special paint on the floor to show them how to get in when it's dark. And it's this grand, wonderful thing. And they get Akim Tamirov, famous Russian, and actually he was Armenian actor, to play the kind of the bankroll of this thing. And the plan proceeds with all of them in Vegas, where, of course, Dean is entertaining at one of the casinos in the lounge, so we can get a Dean Martin song into the movie. And Sammy is a trash truck driver because they're going to throw all the trash, all the money into trash bags, throw it in the trash cans, and he's going to come along and pick them up, and nobody's going to ever wonder where, because remember, it's all cash. It's lots and lots of cash.
Yeah.
And among the other people, I mean, we've got cameos.
Romero.
Yeah, but cameos by Shirley MacLaine and Red Skelton and George Raft. And we've got Cesar Romero as a kind of reformed gangster who happens to be dating Peter Lawford's mother. And they're in Vegas. So when he sees all these guys and kind of smells that they're in on something, his senses get pricked up. And when it happens, he figures out that they must have done it. And when I say they, it's Frank and Dean and Sammy and Peter and Richard Conte and Joey Bishop and Henry Silva and Buddy Lester and Richard Benedict and Norman Fell and Clem Harvey. And anyway, the plot thickens, let's say. And I don't know if we want, well, what the heck, spoiler, it's an old movie.
Yeah.
It had a big twist ending that kind of took everybody by surprise because Cesar Romero goes to the casinos and says, I'll get your money back if you give me a cut. And then he goes to Frank and says, I'll let you get away with it if you give me a cut.
A bigger cut.
So the problem is not how do we steal it, because they pull that off brilliantly. The problem is how the hell do we get it out of town? There are roadblocks on all the roads. The train station and the airport are being watched. And as it happens on the night, one of the gang members has a heart attack and dies. And they get this brilliant idea that they're going to put the money in his coffin because he's supposed to be buried in San Francisco where he's from. And they'll ship the coffin out with the money and they'll get away with it. Only one problem, the funeral director convinces his widow, it'd be a lot cheaper and easier if you just had him cremated and did it here. And so all the money goes up in smoke.
Yeah. So, that was not the ending that I was expecting. I guess I was okay, fair warning. I saw the Clooney movie before I saw this one.
Oh, sure.
And
a lot of people have.
I was expecting there to be some sort of last minute fake out where in fact they'd switch the boxes or like the coffins around or something. But they didn't. No. It was a grim ending for them.
Well, you have to also remember that this is back in the days when crime does not pay and you can't let them get away with it. Which Sinatra made a few crime movies. One of my favorites is one called Assault on the Queen, where they get a submarine and basically stop the Queen Mary in mid-ocean to rob it. So there's all kinds of funny stories like this in the movies. But usually in those days, we talked about on my show with Vash, we talked about the Hays Code and that whole moral, well, you can't let the good guys be bad guys and get away with being bad. That certainly had something to do with the way this ended.
That's what I figured, yeah, but it was still quite a shock, I have to say.
Well, it was a stylish movie. By the way, we have a lot of people you might not have realized reappearing from some of our other films. For example, the opening credits. Yeah, same guy that did Around the World in 80 Days, Saul Bass, did these. Places where it was shot are kind of interesting too, because obviously it was mostly in Vegas. But here's a little bit of trivia I bet nobody but me that knows, which is the opening scene where they're in a barber shop in Beverly Hills. When they put the address in the IMDb listing of the locations, I said, I know where that is. And it was a famous celebrity barber shop on Wilshire Boulevard in Beverly Hills, about 3.5, 4 blocks away from where I lived, called Drucker's. And one of the barbers at Drucker's was a guy named Gelbart. And his son, Larry Gelbart, who you may know as the writer of MASH and a lot of other great movies, started out selling his jokes to comedians because they were clients of his father and the barbers at Drucker's. So he'd hang out at his dad's barbershop peddling jokes, and that's how he got in the biz.
Wow.
So there's that. Anyway, it's a fun movie. I think it's wonderfully well-paced and directed by the amazing director, Louis Milestone, who was twice Academy Award nominated and was really more serious director in most of his career. But he had a sense of humor. And there's a great bit I found where he directed, among other things, All Quiet on the Western Front, the famous grim story of World War I. And they said when he got finished, Carl Laemmle Jr., who was the producer, founder of Universal, demanded a happy ending for the picture. And Milestone called him up and said, I've got your happy ending. We let the Germans win.
Oh, boy.
Anyway, that's the kind of people involved. And as I said, I think it's far superior because of primarily the cast and how ring-a-ding-ding real they were in their, well, at least real to their personas. By the way, they shot this movie all day while performing all night at the Sands with the Rat Pack bit where they all got on stage and drank and carried on.
Kidding. Oh, wow.
And I also learned that Joey Bishop, who was the kind of fifth wheel of the Rat Pack originally, he wrote most of their stage material because he was a pretty accomplished comedian and comedy writer. So there you go. Lorn, tell me I'm wrong.
You know what? I'm glad that, we all love this movie. We thought it was the best movie ever. It was fantastic. We're all
never said that.
Tonight. Have a great night, folks. Oh, wait, Lorn, I think you want to say something.
Yeah, I said a couple of weeks ago that we were going to fight about this movie, and I meant it. I think one of Roger Ebert's things that he said that I love about Roger, and I think this is how he would describe the movie, is that a movie is not about what it's about. It's about how it is about it. And in this case, Ocean's 11 is that's true. It is how it is about it. And I think that's why you can get away with saying that these guys are really cool and the movie is fun because they're really cool. However, I think when it comes to the story part of the movie, it falls down. And I think in every way, the George Clooney remake is superior to it in that sense. And part of the reason for that is when we talked about The Lady Killers, one of the things we talked about when I was trying to understand why did the movie not do so well, part of it was that I felt there was a subtext that the audience didn't get. But the other part was that it was an unsatisfying heist. It's one of those things where the audience goes to a heist picture expecting to see a heist, and in this one they actually do see the heist, but it ends on a down note. Nobody comes out smelling good here, and I don't believe it's just because of the Hays Code. The other thing is, you have this relationship that's set up between Danny Ocean and Angie Dickinson's character, and that is Angie's great for the small bit that she's in the movie. She's fantastic in it, a beautiful woman, fantastic actress in one of my very favorite westerns, Rio Bravo, with also Dean Martin. But they never go back and resolve any of that, and that's where I think that Clooney's version is superior, is because really the entire movie in his version centers around that relationship, although that's not obvious at the beginning. And that's where he makes his big bet, is here's what can happen here at the very end of his version, and it's all centered on that romance between him and Tess. Yeah. So I think that from an audience-pleasing standpoint, from a more tightly written story, and from having the romance angle, I think it's the better movie, hands down.
Ooh, them's fighting words.
I'll agree with all of those considerations for the other movie. I didn't dislike the other movie. There's another problem with the plot in this movie that the other one solves. There really isn't a villain. I mean, you've really got this adversarial relationship with, Andy Garcia in the other movie. Mm-hmm. In this, there's no there. There is no individual that they're out against except Cesar Romero, who really isn't the one they're robbing from. So there's that. And
he's more confused than anything else.
Well, yeah, and he's like, gee, I can't believe these punks are trying to pull the kind of thing that I would have done. But and it's a little pat that he happens to be friends with Lawford's mama. But I don't think, first of all, there's a technology span and an era span. And what you said at the beginning about there not being so many casinos, and certainly even these casinos transmogrified to the time of the current series. But, you didn't have Caesars, and you didn't have the Mirage, and you didn't have all of these amazing mega building spectaculars. For their time, they were pretty great. But Vegas was still basically about nightclubs and gambling and eating and going home and maybe a little finagling in the meanwhile. I'm laughing because before we got started tonight, I was watching a boat review by this kind of funny guy in Australia who does boat reviews. And one of the things that all the other boat reviewers really compliment when it's a high-end boat is that the doors have rubber gaskets around them so that if it's rattling because they're in the ocean, you don't hear that rattle. It's nice and tightly sealed. This guy, his thing is, and there's a nice... He's Australian and he's funny. And he says, there's a nice seal here. So if you make a little noise in the cabin, the other people won't hear you. And I'm going, it never occurred to me that was the reason for it rather than a functional one.
Well, so makes sense.
It's different points of view, different styles. I like Clooney a lot and the rest of them. And I also think in the new movies, some of the in between them humor and ribbing and whatever is awfully damn forced and contrived, and they made a point of making them very eccentric characters for the sake of having eccentric characters. So that part never really sat well with me. But the other question of what you said, Lorn, is, do they really resolve their relationship? It took them, 2-3 more movies to do that, and then one of them, she's the robber, right?
Well, okay. So we're talking about the entire series that was spawned off. I do feel that they decline in quality as you go further forward, especially with Ocean's 13. But if we're talking about just Ocean's 11, which is honestly what I'm talking about here.
Yeah, okay.
I think Ocean's 11 is a Clooney's version is superior. Now, I agree with you that the reason that I like the Sinatra version is because you get that kind of swinging nightclub atmosphere. You get both Dean and Sammy getting some musical numbers in there, although it's obvious that the guys who are playing harmonica have never touched a harmonica in their life.
There is that.
You get to have them playing these tough ex-army operators, which is kind of fun. I like their backstory. But ultimately, I felt there wasn't a payoff. And even worse, when they're all walking out sadly, shocked by the fact that all of that money just burned, and the end credits start to roll, there's still going to be consequences and fallout from this, And I felt like it's like, well, if you're going to go down the dark road, there's a much darker span directly ahead. How are they going to explain this to their employer? What about the police? What's going to happen with Duke Santos? It feels to me I
think Duke will laugh. Their employer, their backer, will be pissed off. Let's fix something else.
Yeah.
But as far as the police, what are they going to do? The money disappeared. It's done. Nobody gets it back. And as will be said in later movies where they get around the you can't have them profit, hey, the insurance company will pay off, so what's the big deal?
But I'm going to come back at you on that, because they made a point in the movie when they get all of the casino owners together to talk about how are we going to recover this money. They made a big point about how we all answer to other people, and those other people, those other people are not going to let this go.
Well, you got a point there.
They also made a point that their insurance company is only going to pay 20% of the loss. So I don't think that resolves those issues.
Practical reality, and when you say 20% of the loss in a cash business, how do you prove the loss?
Well,
how do you prove exactly how much was in the cage at the moment they struck?
But that's another reason why I think they're the real owners of the casinos are going to have some things to say about this.
Oh yeah.
The thing is, though, that as Cesar Romero's character said, he was starting to sweat things a little bit because there was nothing. None of his contacts knew anything was happening with this. They had no idea, and it was because of the fact that Danny Ocean and his team were not pros, and so the only ones who know truly what happened are Cesar Romero and then, Ocean's 11.
And he doesn't really know. He suspects.
Yeah.
And the reason, of course, why professional criminals wouldn't do this, they know about those people behind the casinos and what they do to them for doing it. They're very familiar with the fact that you don't, you have to remember Las Vegas under the mafia was what was called an open city, which meant nobody was supposed to rob anybody there, and there wasn't supposed to be any hits on each other there after that whole crazy time when you saw with The Godfather, with I can't think of the real guy's name, the guy that gets shot in the eye, Mo Green, which did happen, but and certainly with the consequences to Bugsy, which started the whole thing. But no, you didn't mess with those guys because they would find you.
It's kind of the point that's made in the Batman series as well, which is that you had this vigilante coming in and taking out organized crime, and by taking out organized crime, they were actually a bulwark against the crazies. Once you start taking out the mafia, that's when the inmates of Arkham start taking over, and things get
that's
worse.
When you get the Joker and everybody else. Good point.
That's right, old chum.
Nature abhors a vacuum, as they say. And anyway, well. Okay, I'll buy all of that. And I still love this movie. And also, by the way, you were talking recently, Tommy, in one of our other shows about a picture that showed a certain era And this sure did. This sure did.
It's true.
That whole time in Vegas, when it was in its prime, I would commend to everybody out there, if you have any affinity for classic, great professional jazz and crooners and all the things that these guys were, there is a record called Sinatra Live at the Sands. It is a live recording of Frank at the Sands doing his nightclub act. And although it's not credited, you can hear him talking to them because it includes all the in-between song stuff. Dean is there. Sammy may be there. And they're kibitzing back and forth in the audience. And it's Count Basie's orchestra with arrangements by... Go look it up. You'll be amazed at the people involved in this record. But the point is, I remember going to Vegas in the end of that era when the big thing was not the bare naked ladies of the Folie Bergère. It was these individual guys and how cool they were and how they held an audience in the palm of their hand for 2 hours and sold a lot of booze and a lot of gambling and a lot of tickets. This really grabs that era so completely. It's like I remember when I was in high school, my journalism teacher telling me he'd been to Vegas and saw this guy that they'd never heard of in the lounge. Remember, in Vegas, you had the big showroom and you had the lounge. And the lounge was all the young and up-and-coming acts. Wayne Newton got his start playing the piano in the lounge, to give you an idea. And it was kind of the B team. Well, the B pictures, like we've talked about. And he said, I saw this guy, and I don't know why he doesn't get beaten to death every night after the show. It was this insulting guy who called everybody in the audience names and made fun of them, and of course became
Don Rickles.
Don Rickles, exactly.
Wow.
And that was before anybody knew who he was, And so you get that feeling of all of these people. Besides that, in the days even before the whole, although maybe not before, but simultaneous with guys selling maps to the stars' homes in Beverly Hills so people could drive around and say, oh, look, that's where so-and-so lives. You got the impression when you went to Vegas in the 60s that you could walk through the casino and see famous faces shooting craps and playing blackjack. That was why when they opened the first MGM, the one that's now Bally's, they made a big point of putting aside, almost a separate room, but certainly partitioned, a high rollers casino, a high rollers baccarat table where only very, very rich people could play. And you know what happened? They didn't go there because they wanted to be seen. They wanted to be in the middle of the action and call attention to how wonderful they were, or at least how rich. So it was a serious miscalculation of the ego of these people.
Fair enough. No, this movie was really interesting, and it surprised me a little bit because my expectation going into this was that it was going to be something along the lines of a how do I put it? Let me see if I can find that original picture that I threw up. This one right here. So I'd always seen this in the the Walmart DVD bins and all of that, and looking at just this cover and seeing those names, Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis, my expectation was always that, this is going to be kind of like a musical comedy type of, light and fluffy thing.
Like Robin and the Seven Hoods, a movie that they did that's wonderful, but it's more like that. Like, what was it called? 4 for Texas or something, or Sergeant's 3, the Western comedy musicals that they did.
So I didn't realize that this cover is the only time in the entire movie where Frank Sinatra actually smiles. He is deadly serious through the entire thing. Playing the sergeant, just it wasn't campy at all. It was really serious with itself. Like, yes, you had Sammy Davis Jr. breaking out to a little bit of a song with some of his fellow garbage men around him and whatnot. But it was
Sinatra was pranking his employer pretty hard for the first part of the movie.
Well, there was some of that, but. The Sinatra character, especially as it went on, like he was stone-faced, and I wasn't expecting that from Sinatra, given, you put him on at Christmas time to hear the crooning and whatnot. So it for me, that was a pleasant surprise. I appreciated that in the film. I also appreciated the fact that they they actually, they had a plan. They went and they did it. It wasn't again like a fluffy film. It wasn't something that sort of skimped over the details too much. So at that respect, I did like it. But like Lorn, though, I did pick up on the fact that they did not follow through with Frank Sinatra and his wife's relationship at all. And that kind of was left up in the air. And then, of course, the ending where the money goes up in flames, literally, and they all walk away kind of feeling a bit destitute and dispirited. And
but at least Sammy's singing a good song during.
Yeah, Sammy's singing the song. But I mean, it's maybe my expectations have been subverted by modern media, but you always kind of expect for the main characters in a film, even if they are criminals, to kind of come out ahead at the end of the day. And you didn't really see that much here. So those two things kind of knocked the wind out of my sails a little bit. But the only other criticism that I'd have with it is that I almost felt like there was a bit too much time spent on the scouting of the casinos. And they go to 5 different casinos that are planning to rob them all. And you see them basically scouting all 5 different casinos. And then when the robbery is actually in place, you see them going through all 5 different casinos.
I just wonder if some of that is like product placement in return for using their casino, that we want to have ourselves noticed and which brand we are and how we're different. So that could have been.
It felt a bit repetitive. And I wonder if that could have, if the movie would have been hurt by cutting some of that out and just like sort of tightening the runtime up a little bit.
I think that was the point. When they're actually about to kick off the heist, they had timed it down to the second. They know how long Auld Lang Syne is going to take to sing. And they do that clever cut between each of the lounges where they're all like, they've got the stage show with the ladies in each of the different lounges.
But all different colors and all different styles so that you're going from one to the other. That's really good too, I think. It's
great. But they're all doing the same thing. And that's how you know this thing is going to go off like clockwork, because they've got it all figured out. They know what is going to be taking place at every step along the way, and that's why they can carry out this plan with such precision.
You know what it also reminds me of, thinking about it? In the great days of Pleasure Island at Walt Disney World, where there was a comedy club, there was a rock club, there was a techno club, there was the Wonderful Adventurers Club. But every night at midnight, they had everybody go out in the street, and they had a New Year's Eve with fireworks and balloons and everybody singing Auld Lang Syne. It's almost reminding me of that, because you had the different styles, but they all came together for that same seminal moment. And you have to remember, in those days, I remember, I'm sure you do, everybody turned on the TV to watch the ball drop from New York. And Guy Lombardo and his orchestra were always the orchestra. His Royal Canadians, by the way, table. So what, but the other thing that occurred to me when you kept saying employer, and Lorn, let's talk about this, because I think it's an interesting comparison because they're both so good. Akim Tamiroff versus Elliot Gould.
Oh,
as far as the old one and the new one, and that's that role of the guy behind. Well, of course, Gould has a vested interest because he's been done dirt by the bad guy, but still,
that's a tough one.
That's hard, because I love both of those performances.
I think they're both great. I just think it's interesting how different, and yet how that's the role in the story that they both play.
They're great in different ways. And what I loved about this version is just how nervous he is and how they're playing with him the whole time.
He was a very hard-working, often working actor, Akim Tamiroff. And like I say, he was really Armenian, but he played everything. He did French, and he did, in Orson Welles, who he got to be friends with and did a lot of work with, in another movie we should do sometime, Touch of Evil, he's the head of the Mexican mafia, for God's sakes. And he's just wonderful. But there's an interesting little quote I found from him about doing, I think it's They Came to Cordoba, or one of the ones with, wait, and I'll find it. Have fun amongst yourselves. I'll find it. I really will. But it's a really telling thing about the guy as an actor.
I think I'd have to give the edge to Ace Boss in this case. It's thinking it over. I think he wins it in this one.
Yeah,
I love that the cowboy The cowboy drawl. I mean, his name is Acebos, but the guy's like, well, Ace Boss, what are y'all doing here?
Yeah, Ace Boss.
That was amazing.
I mean, he was with the Moscow Art Theater, and he was a serious guy. But it was a thing about Gary Cooper, and he talked about making this movie, and he says, we're doing the movie, and I'm just owning him. I am so much more vibrant on the screen and so much more fantastic, and he's just there. But then I see the rushes, and everybody else disappears. He says, I don't know how he did it, but he held the screen the way that none of us ever could. So he was a very observant guy. Another person involved in this movie, by the way, is a name that you might or might not know, and that is Arthur Morton. Arthur Morton is the orchestrator. Now, Nelson Riddle did the score. Sammy Kahn and who was it? Somebody else did the songs. But Arthur Morton is probably the most prolific musician almost in the history of the movies. Everything that Jerry Goldsmith ever did, he orchestrated. Everything. Oh. So when you think of the range of that, from Star Trek to all those other movies, he started in, I happen to know him because his wife and my mother were in the PTA together, and he lived about 2 blocks away from me. But he started in 1935, and he did every movie. His last picture was L.A. Confidential in 1997. How's that for a run? Okay. Star Trek First Contact, Chain Reaction, First Night, The River Wild, The Shadow, which we saw. He did the orchestrations of that. Mr. Baseball, Medicine Man, JFK, The Russia House, Gremlins, and the Gremlins 2, Total Recall, all the Star Trek movies, of course. He just was everywhere. Inner Space, Hoosiers, Amazing Stories, King Solomon's Mines, Rambo, Supergirl. God, it goes on for days. Secret of Nim, Poltergeist, Inchon, Masada, The Final Conflict, Charlie Chan and the Curse of the Dragon Queen. I mean, big movies and not so big movies. This guy was there and involved. So that's kind of fun.
Wow. The other thing that I was surprised by, too, in this film, I thought Sinatra would have been crooning a lot more during the entire thing. But you only get one song of his at the very, very end. Well,
that's because you only got one take with Frank. He was famous for that. I mean,
oh, really?
Oh, God, he was, we do it right and we're done and thanks. I got other things to do. He was famous for, now on music in the studio, he would do them 10 times to get it right, but not in the movies.
He did it his way.
I see what you did there. Well, this movie, it was released in 1960, in August of 1960, and it had not really sure what the budget was, but the box office came back at 5.5 million, which I don't think was that bad for the time, especially. And it's got mixed reviews online. However, it still, I think, was well enough received that people have, enjoyed it, and it was re-released on.
I think it's a movie that it's had a revival of attention because of the new ones. Otherwise, a lot of people, it just kind of slipped right by. Oh, here's a fun little uncredited thing in the movie. At the end for the funeral, guess who dubbed the voice of the minister at the funeral? Richard Boone.
Oh, really?
How about that, huh?
Paladin himself.
Yes.
Wow.
So and it's like, well, yeah, I'll do a day. Sure, what the heck? Where's the microphone? We have a voice talking to the sheriff on the phone, George Fenneman, who everybody knows as the co-host with Groucho of their game show. Hoot Gibson is in the movie as a deputy at one of those roadblocks, uncredited. This was like everybody who knows anybody and you want to have a day's work, we'll give you one. Pinky Lee is in the movie uncredited as a Riviera employee. And, of course, Shirley MacLaine, who's in it, has no credit.
She's in it?
Yeah, what? She's in it.
Really?
She's that drunk lady that's falling all over.
That was Shirley MacLaine?
Yes.
No kidding.
Oh,
yes.
Wow. That was the funniest scene in the movie, I thought.
Well, there you go. Yeah. And that was her. That was her. Obviously not wearing her Indian veil.
I never would have known. I had no idea that was her.
Yeah. Anyway, this was, listen, this is when Frank and the boys are in Vegas. Let's have a party. And oh, by the way, we'll make a movie. Because again, they performed every night while they were shooting this thing. So that's another reason why Frank didn't want to do too many takes. He had to get a little sleep.
Yeah, that's wild. I mean, how do you even? Wow, that sort of endurance is incredible. I gotta say,
you just gotta be ring-a-ding-ding. That's all, I guess. But anyway, 100%. And of course, you had all these Henry Silva and Buddy Lester and Richard Benedict and these people that Norman Fell that worked all the time. Anyway,
so, Lou, I gotta ask you then, why did you? Let me put it this way: your original quote was Clooney and Brad Pitt and all those guys were acting cool, but the Rat Pack were naturally cool. Why did you think that Clooney and Brad Pitt aren't cool?
Not Sinatra cool. You guys know that, among other things, I'm something called a Tennessee Squire, which is it's a fan club for people involved with Jack Daniels. So when I was writing restaurants and stuff, a Brown Foreman, which is the company that owns it, rep initiated me into this society. Well, there is a famous, I'll have to get it to you. Maybe you can cut it in afterwards. There's a famous photograph that people in the Jack Daniels community know that shows a helicopter. And Frank Sinatra with the what do you call it, pork pie Hamburg hat, stepping out of the helicopter with a Jack Daniels in one hand. And the meme is, you may be cool, but you're not as cool as Frank Sinatra getting out of a helicopter with a Jack Daniels. Cool.
Wow.
So, I mean, he was an interesting guy. Did I ever tell you guys about the one time that I actually interacted with him sort of from afar?
No.
Well, when I was a kid, my family, my grandfather bought it. My family had what was known in those days as an own your own apartment rather than condominium, because they hadn't invented that name yet, in Palm Springs. And it was one of these classic 12 units around a pool, one level, apartment houses. And the guy who lived next to us was an old guy named Bernie, who was, he was buddies with Frank from the old days in New Jersey. And one day, my brother and I might have been 9, 10, 11. My brother and I are in the swimming pool. We're the only ones there. It's the middle of the day. And suddenly from inside Bernie's, we hear this yelling, "Bernie, you cheap SOB. I can't believe you still have only a black and white television set." And the door bursts open, and here's Frank Sinatra. And we're going, holy. And he drags Bernie's television out, waves us aside, and throws it into the swimming pool. But of course, then these two guys in a furniture truck are outside, and they bring in a brand new color TV and fish the other one out. That was Frank's idea of a gag. And it was like, whoa, did we just see what we just saw? It was pretty straight. Well, and the famous line about Sinatra was Tommy Dorsey, who said, Frank Sinatra is the most fascinating man in the world, but don't put your hand in the cage.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about Sinatra. I'm obviously familiar with his music and his performances, but the man himself, I don't know a whole lot about. But I've always had that impression is that he seems like a guy who could turn on a dime.
Well, yeah, and for example, as part of that whole he made Jack Daniels famous, really, and Jackie Gleason is the one who first introduced it to him. But when they knew that Frank and the boys liked to play golf, and they once asked Frank, are you a member of a country club? And he said, yeah, the Jack Daniels Country Club, and had patches, blazer patches made up with Jack Daniels and 2 crossed golf clubs behind it, and gave them to all the guys in the Rat Pack. And in fact, Jack Daniels now has a commemorative version of Jack Daniels called Sinatra Select. And when you got it originally, when it first came out, because it was insanely expensive, but it's awfully damn good, it came with one of those patches for you to put on your jacket. So they're very closely related. But yeah, he was something. I mean, you have to remember that he was the biggest star forever, and then suddenly he wasn't. And there's all this stuff that led to the story that's in The Godfather with the horse's head in the bed to get in the part. That didn't happen, but he did get, through some influence, that part in From Here to Eternity, which suddenly made him an actor in demand and revived his entire career. And he's very good in that movie, I must say. It isn't undeserved. But
so aside from this one, do you have a favorite Sinatra movie then? Would it be that one?
I don't know if it would be that one. I think actually with the bunch of them, with the Rat Pack, that Robin and the Seven Hoods is a wonderful movie, and Bing Crosby is in it too. And it's kind of a pseudo Damon Runyon-y story, but it's also a take on Robin Hood, obviously. And if you go look on YouTube, you can find the clip. Be a do-gooder, not a do-badder, of a song that they do in that movie. And the other one is the great song, You've Either Got or You Haven't Got Style. And they keep changing clothes, and they're trying to make Bing Crosby a little less of a stick in the mud in the process. And of course, before Sinatra, the greatest crooner star of all time was Bing Crosby. So that's a great movie. That's a lot of fun. Well, and then they did these westerns, Sergeants 3 and 4 for Texas, and Oh, and then of course there's the serious ones. I mean, what was it called? Lady in Cement, with him and Raquel Welch, and he's a detective. And Tony Rome, I think, is one of them. But I would say if you haven't seen Robin and the Seven Hoods, that might be worth a movie for us to do also, because it's kind of, maybe do 2 at a time. Do that and Guys and Dolls, because they're both in the same milieu in that same period, and they're both kind of MGM musical kind of movies.
Well, we can add that to the list, certainly, but that does raise a good point. I'm surprised that Bing Crosby wasn't in this film, unless I'm
well, by then he was an elder statesman, I would say, as far as movies were concerned. He did a lot of TV, but let's see.
Because I mean, I'm certain it would have, he could have done some sort of cameo or something in this.
Well, of course, there's a question of, if you're Bing Crosby, do you want to be just a cameo in a Frank movie?
That's true.
I mean, in the other one, he has an actual part to play. But Bing was born in 1903, so that would have made him a little
57.
past this one. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough.
But and he was busy.
How great would that have been, though?
Well, like I say, go watch Robin and the Seven Hoods, and you can see them together again for the first time. So
fair enough.
This kind of goes to another reason why I think the Clooney version is superior, though, is that you're talking about how all of the characters in the Clooney versions are oddballs, and that's true. But part of the reason that they are is because each of them has a particular specialty that's needed for the job. Whereas in this case, there's 11 people, and the basic concept is that you got one inside guy and one outside guy at each place. You focus on really probably about 4 of the 11, and the other 7 are just kind of there. And so I think that's another weakness.
Which would have been true if they were a real platoon in the war too, of course. But you had the boss, the sergeant, and then you had the guy with the BAR, and in this case, one of them is a good demolition and electronics guy. Right. But so maybe they tried too hard to be real in that sense. But yeah,
it's a fair point. You really didn't get a lot of a sense of the personality of the rest of the 11, for better or for worse. But
there's the whole everybody gets so much screen time depending on how prominent they are. But
true enough,
right? But I mean, when you've got somebody coming onto your crew who is a literal cowboy, you hope that he's there for some cowboy reason.
Granted.
in this case, it's just he's there to make cowboy jokes.
Well, and he only made this and 4 more movies in his entire career. So go figure. Clem, I can't think of his name now, but
all hat, no cattle.
There you go. Well, if for nothing else, calling
Clem Harvey.
If for nothing else, calling the mastermind Ace Boss all the time, I think was well worth the presence.
Well, in a way, that's a comment on the war. One of the fun things that Sinatra did, and very famously, is a short subject during or after the war, called "The House I Live In," and it is the best propagandistic "we're all alike, don't be a racist" movie I think that Hollywood's ever really done. And it's only a short, but it's about him and this street corner gang of kids. And he's talking about this house that I live in, and we all live together in the same house, no matter who we are. And and that's what America means to me. And that's worth people Wikipediaing or Googling or YouTubing too.
Well, I mean, if you dig into the backstory of Sinatra and Sammy too, those guys were tight.
Oh yeah,
they were very, very tight.
Well, I knew Sammy too because we went to the same dentist.
Oh,
we would kibitz in the waiting room at the dentist's office quite a bit.
No kidding.
And he famously had problems with his teeth after that car crash that he lost his eye in. So,
wow.
Yeah. It's a small town. It's a small town, guys. When you live there, I went to high school with Dean's son.
Wow.
And when he died, Dean's world just collapsed. You used to see him all alone in this restaurant in Beverly Hills, and every time you'd ever go in there, he was there and by himself and very low key and very quiet. And yet, of course, he was doing his show and the roasts and Carson all the time, and was still great. So.
Wow.
Well, it ain't easy being king. All of these guys, like I say, I was interested to learn that it was Joey Bishop who wrote most of their onstage, seemingly ad-libbed interplay. And so, and then you look at these guys. Henry Silva worked all the time as a bad guy in movies of every ethnicity possible. And, it was a time when if you were friends and you worked all the time.
Yep.
So that's just the way it was.
So I think we've gone through what we liked and what we didn't like too much about this film, and so maybe we can just do another one of these sort of final thoughts on it. And I'll start with Lorn. Has your opinion changed a little bit now after this conversation?
No, not appreciably. What I love about the movie, honestly, is it's kind of what I loved about the last one, is that it's a peek at an era that I didn't get to experience and wish that I could have. It's like I do remember a little bit of the era from Roller Coaster, but I never got to see the swinging 60s. And I think it would have been amazing to have been able to experience Vegas back then, the lounge acts and the comedy and the music. They got to show some of that in this movie, and that made me wish I could have seen something like that, because there was a class to it, and the talent that was on display, and just regular folks could go and see it. It's not like that anymore, and I think that we've lost something from it.
And by the way, you weren't paying $200 a ticket or more like you would be now. You slipped the maitre d' $20 to get a front row table, but that was it. And for those who didn't look it up and were wondering before, Quincy Jones was conducting and arranging the Count Basie Orchestra on that Sinatra at the Sands record. So how's that for a mix of talent on one disc?
Wow.
Trust me, if you have one jazz Sinatra Vegas oriented record in your collection, you want to buy that. You really, really do.
There's one other comment I want to make about the movie before I get my thoughts out, and that is that Angie Dickinson is great in the little time that she's in the movie, but it's criminal to only use Angie Dickinson for that little bit of the movie. She's wonderful, and she needed to be in it more. Yeah.
But of course, that would make the plot more about that, and they meanwhile had to rob the bank, so to speak. So I understand why she isn't. I agree with you that it's a deficit. Absolutely. Oh, here's a fun thing. I was looking up that record, and they gave a few other pictures. It is the marquee at the Sands, and it says Jack Entratter, who was the entertainment guy there, presents Dean Martin, and then underneath in smaller letters, maybe Frank, maybe Sammy.
That does remind me of one other thing. Part of the fun is like Red Skelton's got a great little scene in the movie. Yeah. Has one of the better jokes when he's being hauled off. Be careful with that arm. That's my slut pulling arm. Right. But you get to see all of these acts that are on the marquees out of all of the various casinos. One of them has got Buddy Hackett on there. Yeah. I really was hoping he was going to appear. It's like you could see they got all the Catskills performers. It's like, man, that would have been great to have seen him in their prime there.
And that's what Vegas was in those days. That's what Vegas was. And now Buddy's son, Sandy, has a comedy club at one of the hotels. I forget which one. And he went to high school with my brother, so go figure.
But if I can just jump in there, it's funny. I completely get where you're coming from, Lorn. I feel with this film, with Around the World in 80 Days, you're getting this sort of nostalgia for a time when you obviously didn't live through it. And it really comes through in some of these films. I wish that I'd been able to live through some of this as well. Like, people wearing suits at all hours of the day, all the time.
Yes. And again, no cell phones, no video game things in their face all day long. And our theme song, if we have one on this show, is that there's a lot of quality entertainment out there that you may not have been exposed to. So when current day lets you down, as it seems like it mostly does, you're only as far away from that as your streaming or preferably your Blu-ray or whatever, because it wasn't that long ago that they knew how to make this work. It just wasn't that long ago. And my comparison between this movie and the newer versions is not to say the newer versions are bad. I don't think they're bad at all. I think they're great entertainment. But is to say that this has that added factor of taking you to a time and a place. Remember, being cool or acting cool or whatever nowadays is you're cooler than all the other wannabe cool people. In those days, you were a freak. I mean, these guys, the reason why, well, similar comparison. One of the best shows in Vegas, if you go, is the very first Cirque du Soleil show, Mystère. But the next best one, and the one I would recommend everybody go see, even if you're not necessarily a Beatles fan, is Love, which is the Cirque du Soleil's take on the Beatles. And why it's so interesting is it starts off with their early history, and it shows you that grim, terrible post-war place that Liverpool was, that England was, that everything was bombed out. And if it wasn't bombed out, it was black and gray and dull. And they were still rationing food, and they were still rationing everything. And they were banning things from the BBC so that these pirate radio stations had to happen off the coast. And into that come these guys who brought a point of view that said, no, damn it, the war's over. We're not going to mourn all day and all night. We went through it. It was bad, fine, but there's room for fun. There's room for love. There's room for cheer. Well, in a way, a much lesser way perhaps, but still in a way, this whole ring-a-ding-ding cool stuff that went from Frank and Dean and Sammy to Johnny Carson to all kinds of entertainment, it was a way of saying that stayed and true, that Hays Code 1950 stuff that we've talked about, that it was time to get rid of that too. And that's also, of course, what the whole Beatles revolution did to America as well. But it was not just refreshing and different. It was weird, but it's weird, but I like it. I don't know why I like it. I don't think I need to analyze it that deeply at the time. All I know is when those guys start singing, I'm snapping my fingers along with them and tapping my foot and enjoying it. And that, of course, is not just the singers, but the arrangers and the bands. And I mean, geez.
Yeah, you keep talking about these like bug guys. I guess I should check out their album.
Yeah, you probably should. You probably should.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just think it was a breath of fresh air that we needed. And I was able to catch a little bit of it. I was still relatively young. But I mean, Vegas. And then Vegas went away from it. Vegas became all of these massive shows and these massive special effects things and pirate ships dueling out in front of the hotel and all the rest of that stuff. And then Steve Wynn, of course, began with the Golden Nugget downtown and built a showroom that held, are you ready? 280 people. And I went, and it was like a nightclub from the 40s. And I'll never forget going there, and over again, for some reason, they paired together, and I must have seen him 10 times if I saw him once. Lou Rawls as the opening musical act, followed by Alan King as the comedian. And you sat there at the bar, and you could have been in New York in 1945, you know? It was just, wow. You walked out of there, and you knew you'd been entertained by professional people who really, really wanted you to have a good time and forget your cares and forget your troubles. And, of course, in the process, forget about all that money you were losing at the tables, I guess, too. Well, and the rooms were not $800 a night, and the dinner was not $500, and it wasn't what it is now.
But that's kind of the magic of entertainment. That's why what we're talking about is important, is that if you're entertained, then the money's worth it.
Yeah. Unless it's $180 a day to get into a theme park where you then have to pay $20-$30 a ride for the ones that used to be included. suddenly it's no fun anymore. Or a $16 balloon, famously.
That's a really good point, though, because the Vegas that they showed in this film, it was a much more intimate, almost welcoming Vegas, I feel, than what current Vegas is today, for the reasons that you outlined.
The Strip looked tiny in the movie.
Yeah, and it was. But it was, well, my father, God bless him, the last time he was in Vegas and we came back home, he said, I saw all those people who walk the Strip. They get at one end and they go to every hotel all night long. He says, they didn't look like they were having fun. They looked like they were on the Bataan Death March. It was like, well, you have to do this. This is work. In fact, I remember one time we were sitting at a bar, my wife and I, that is in a hotel but leads out onto the Strip. And she was just looking at the shoes. And it was all these people in these ridiculous high-heeled crazy shoes, and they're all walking 10 miles a night to go be entertained. And she said, the people at Walmart site, we should do one called The Shoes of Las Vegas because they're so silly. Yeah. But, and of course, the other thing to remember about all of this is it was before drugs took over the universe, too. I mean, they were drunks, no doubt about it. There were a lot of people drinking, a lot. But anyway, it was a special time, and this movie will give you the closest thing you can give to what it was like. And that's the thing. It's a movie. It's not real. It's fiction. Oh, yeah? But it's grounded in an atmosphere and a time and a place no less than Around the World in 80 Days is grounded in 1880s England or whatever it is.
True enough.
Yeah.
Well, I think that was a great conversation, and we had quite a lot to talk about on there. Yes. Gentlemen, I think thank you for the chat. Thank you for the battle between Lou and Lorn. I appreciate that. I don't think we had a victory here, but
I don't think it was a war. It was perspectives on a theme, and I think we both respect. Oh, come on.
Come on, we got to give him the drama, Lou.
This is the genre guys. This isn't the WWE.
I can't deal with this person anymore. I'm just gonna have to leave.
There we go. As he rips his shirt off. Well, members, thank you so much for tuning in and for listening to another Genre Guys. If you've seen the movie, if you liked it, let us know your thoughts. Leave us a comment down below if there's another movie that you'd like us to cover. Also, please do not hesitate to suggest it. We'd love to hear from you.
And know that we have things from the past, things from the far future, things from the imagination, all already ready to key up. And we think you're going to continue to like them. And if you're watching this, 3 months from now on the new podcast channel, thank you very much for watching there too. But those of you who are members of the Pro channel get it first and get it exclusively, and that's a good thing. So keep being members.
Yes.
Enjoy.
All right. Have a wonderful day, night, wherever you may be, and we will see you next time on The Genre Guys.
We hope you enjoyed that special presentation of The Genre Guys here on 23PO. Be sure to subscribe to this channel for more content like it. And if you want to enjoy every episode of The Genre Guys as soon as they are released, be sure to become a member at WW Pro's YouTube channel. What were your thoughts on this amazing film? Let us know in the comments below, and thank you so much for watching. T3PO. Please comment, like, and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe to That Park Place Podcasts Online, your source for exclusive content and highlights from WDW Pro, The Pro Show, and That Park Place for all the news that should be fun.